A very good morning to everyone. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome all of you, distinguished guests, vice chancellors, speakers, invitees, heads of institutions, and all other delegates joining us from across the world to Symbiosis International University's Internationalization of Higher Education Conference. Thank you all very much for joining us for day 2 of the conference. I'm Damini, and I'll be your MC for this session. Before we begin, a quick few housekeeping announcements. Can we please ensure that we put our phones on silent? Yeah. Each session will be followed by a Q&A segment. So I would also request all of our delegates to keep their questions handy. Please refrain from recording the sessions. All the sessions right now are being recorded and are also being live streamed onto YouTube and will be uploaded to YouTube after the conference as well. We also request all of our attendees to please be mindful of the schedule and take their seats on time throughout the day because we have a really full and exciting program ahead. All right. Quick word about Symbiosis International University, which has been led with the motto of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which translates to the world is one family, and has consistently engaged with education as a global interconnected practice. IHE extends and solidifies that commitment by creating a space for educators, pedagogues, and policymakers from around the world to deliberate upon the ways in which education not only transcends geographical boundaries, but also enables the conceptualization of a more unified and equitable world. Each session of IHE 2026 has been carefully crafted as a crucial node in the larger task of mapping the trajectory of the growing relevance of transnational education. Together, sessions have been designed as interlocking conversations that will enable us to systematically unpack the various facets of our central theme, transnational education in transition. The first session, titled International Higher Education in Transition, Changing Dynamics and Newer Dimensions, aims to set the stage for the conference by making sense of the unfolding complexities within TNE at present. While the movement of people is a long-standing norm, the panel will examine the relatively newer phenomenon of programs and universities crossing borders to reshape traditionally national education systems. University leaders will unpack the theoretical and practical dimensions of this transition, focusing on the rise of international education hubs across Asia. May I please invite the speakers and the moderator on the stage? The speakers for this session are Dr. N.V. Varghese, former Vice Chancellor, National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration, India. Ms. Ravneet Pava, Vice President of Global Engagement and CEO of South Asia at Deakin University, Australia. Dr. Rajesh Pankaj, Director and Head of Higher Education, FICCI, India. And Mr. Aditya Melkani, Senior Advisor and India Country Lead of Strategic Partnerships for University of Bristol, UK. Dr. Nidhi Piplani Kapoor will moderate this session. Dr. Piplani Kapoor is Head of International Initiatives at the Noida campus and Head of the Symbiosis Center for European Studies at Symbiosis International University. She is a recipient of the prestigious Government of Ireland Research Scholarship for her doctoral research at Southeast Technological University. Dr. Piplani Kapoor represents India as the youngest and only Indian Asian member of the General Council of the European Association for International Education, EAIE, Netherlands. With over 15 years of experience in international higher education, her professional work has focused on advancing internationalization in higher education through institutional strategy, policy development, and practice-led initiatives, particularly internationalization at home, or what is called IAH, while strengthening research, innovation, and higher education engagement across the EU-India corridor. Dr. Piplani Kapoor is a recipient of the Europe-India 40 Under 40 Leaders Award in 2021, conferred by the Europe-India Centre for Business and Industry for her contributions to the Europe-UK-India corridor, and is a founding member of the WICCI India EU Business Council, advocating for stronger India-EU relations with a particular emphasis on women's leadership. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, Damini. Thank you, everyone. Good morning to the panelists, the dignitaries, and the delegates who have joined us today. We have had some really interesting conversations yesterday, starting with empirical evidences and research papers by scholars in the field, critiquing the developments in transnational education, followed by a very interesting roundtable with senior leaders deliberating on whether India can truly become a global education hub by 2047. Today, we are going to be looking at the transition that we find ourselves in, looking and starting from what could have been a traditional internationalization focused on mobility of students and scholars to institutions, systems, programs now transcending borders. But the question is that what really the shift means, whether it is about creating another opportunity or whether it is about reproducing global hierarchies that we have been discussing about yesterday. And we also find ourselves in this very complex time, looking at competition versus collaboration, talking about quality assurance, regulations. We are talking about access and affordability and questioning the rise and paradigms that we find ourselves in. So today's panel is going to be reflecting on the philosophical underpinnings, the rise of transnational education, and also at the same time looking at what's happening in theory and practice. So I have great speakers who are going to be covering the Indian, British, as well as the Australian context from their experiences, which I'm very delighted to welcome and introduce. So we have with us Professor Dr. N.V. Varghese. He's a distinguished professor at Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, and a consultant at the Center for Social and Economic Progress. He's the former Vice Chancellor of the National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration and founding director of its Center for Policy and Research in Higher Education. An internationally recognized expert in education policy, planning, and financing, he has led global research, editorial boards, and major collaborative networks. Welcome, sir. We also have with us Dr. Rajesh Pankaj. He is the Director and Head of Higher Education, Skill Development, and EdTech at the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, FICCI. With extensive experience since 2007, he has led initiatives in policy advocacy, research, strategic partnerships, and internationalization, helping position FICCI as a leader in the education sector. He regularly engages with the government, industry, academia, and global agencies on key policy and program development. He's a trained social anthropologist, and we had some interesting discussions yesterday about that. So he holds a PhD from the University of Delhi on that, and previously has worked with the Indian Market Research Bureau International. And a great friend for Symbiosis, again, just like Dr. Varghese, Ravneet and Aditya. Thank you. Welcome on board. We have with us Ms. Ravneet Pawar. She's a visionary leader in international education with over 3 decades of experience driving Australia-India collaboration. As Vice President, Global Engagement, CEO for South Asia at Deakin University, she's been instrumental in shaping Deakin's India strategy, from establishing its first international office in 1994 to leading the launch of the university's pioneering Gift City campus, the first international branch campus in India. Her leadership has forged over 30 strategic partnerships across academia, industry, and government, positioning Deakin as a trailblazer in transnational education and innovation. A strong advocate for equity, inclusion, and sustainable development, Ravneet also serves as a co-chair of the Australia-India Women's Leadership Forum and as an advisory council member of the Confederation of Indian Industry. Recognized with numerous awards, she continues to champion education as a catalyst for economic growth, social progress, and global understanding. Welcome, Ravneet. And finally, we have with us my friend Aditya Malkani. He's a senior advisor and India country lead strategic partnerships for the University of Bristol, UK. He has been actively involved with the University of Bristol's engagement in India since 2018, playing this role as a partnership consultant. Aditya's work for the University of Bristol is delivered under the aegis of the Association of Commonwealth Universities, ACU, with whom he has been associated since August 2017. At the ACU, Aditya is currently the Membership Engagement Lead India and Southeast Asia, and he was previously the Regional Director, Membership Asia Pacific. Prior to joining ACU, Aditya was also the country head for King's College London, where he was responsible for developing universities, partnerships, and collaborations in India. Aditya has been in the education sector for about over 15 years and speaks regularly on issues related to higher education at national and international conferences. His body of work has taken him to over 25 countries in the Asia, the Americas, Europe, and the Pacific, Africa, and he is truly an internationalist at heart. So welcome on board to the panelists. So we are going to be now kicking off the session. I understand we have the inaugural ceremony right after, so we'll try and be on time and we'll adhere to the time limits in terms of responding the question in 5 minutes. So we begin with understanding and exploring the conceptual realities and conceptual foundations and emerging realities that we find ourselves in. And I would like to, through this panel, to reflect on looking at what TNE is and how it is different from internationalization of higher education, and then moving to Ravneet and Aditya's experiences and practice with setting up the campuses here, and then Rajesh, you giving a broad overview from the Indian perspective from Wiki as you view the developments at the stage. So Professor Workis, I would like to pick your brains first here. And I understand we have had some conversation yesterday, but for the wider audience, it will be interesting to know that would you see internationalization of higher education conceptually different from transnational education, and whether it reflects a broader transition in global higher education.
Thank you very much. I think one need to look at internationalization based on the changing framework from which internationalization can be looked into. I think when we talk about internationalization, etc., in India especially, we talk about Takshashila, Nalanda, and other things. And when you look to that part of the time period and also the world, not only in India, even outside, it was the academic curiosity was the major reason or the framework from which we can analyze internationalization at that point of time. This is very important in the sense that it is not education for employment, it is not education for skills, it is not education for, it was the academic interest and academic curiosity, if I can use that word and frame it like that. But the major efforts towards internationalization, if I can use the national efforts towards internationalization, came into existence in the post-secondary, post-World War period too. And that was two types of changes that were important to notice at that point of time. One, the European reconstruction period, whether it not only confined to European, the Marshall Plan that I am referring to. Not only that, it is also important to see that Japanese reconstruction period at that point of time. That is also a period that is associated with the decolonization process in most of the countries in Africa and Asia, although Latin America has already decolonized earlier. And another significant feature which is not highlighted significantly or importantly is the fact that many of the leaders in the third world who fought for national freedom, they had an international education, international experience, and Western democratic principles aligned with them. These three factors contributed to a situation of internationalization for national development. It may seemingly conflicting picture, but that is the reality. I don't have time to explain it. If you see how IITs came into existence in India, if you look at how IIMs came into existence in India, in all these things that you try to see is that we are asserting self-determination. We are asserting self-reliance through education, through building the best institutions that are possible. And these institutions are established with foreign collaboration. So it may look little conflicting. In reality, this is the time I like to call as internationalization for national development. So it's not only in India, in other countries. But India had two important factors which are in its favor. One, we adopted a planning framework or a public sector dominated framework for development. And the second Equally important dimension is also the fact that we were also ready to accept these type of ideas from abroad, and open-mindedness, much more than perhaps now what we see in the country. So that's a second stage and framework from which we can look at internationalization. Then we move to a stage where internationalization is interpreted in terms of globalization. It's a different part. It takes place in the 1980s and 1990s when education was seen as a commodity to be traded, to be marketed. Cross-border marketing and trading became one of the important dimensions of education. And if you see the framework, yesterday, Madam Gupta was elaborating these 4 modes of trade. And what is important is that presence of commercial units. That is more important when you are talking about institutional mobility. So that word commercial, Madam explained it yesterday, is very significant in the sense that the modus operandi has moved away from the public sector and public commitment and social commitment of higher education, more towards market orientation and market-friendly reforms and market-oriented development. This is a very significant development where higher education is treated as a commodity to be placed in the marketplace. This is the third stage of development of market. 2 minutes. A third stage in terms of the development of internationalization, more in terms of globalization. So what we see today in the context of internationalization is a process by which the market orientation is strengthening in different ways and different forms. I think I like to see TNE, because if you see that institutional mobility, traditional mobility in the context of internationalization was only teachers and students. Institutional mobility is an invention of this century. And program mobility is an invention of the second decade of this century. That means from 2010 to 20 now onwards. So you find that these are different variations of the market process. What I am trying to say is that state has withdrawn from funding. Previously, we used to look at state as a financier, funding, policy, management, and all other dimensions. The state has withdrawn from that. That space that is left by the state is occupied by the market, and you find that various forms and measures that are adopted even by the state today is very market friendly. And even when we are talking about foreign institutions are coming and establishing campuses in India or in any other place, what you are looking at is the framework is market orientation. The framework is market determined, market compelled, market forced, market pressurized way of looking at higher education. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for taking us through the revolution and the rise of marketization of higher education versus looking at internationalization for national development. Aditya, I would like to understand more from you in practice. So now, as University of Bristol establishes its campus in India, what informed this decision at this point in time, and how does India's emerging ecosystem, especially in comparison to more established hubs in, say, the Middle East and other parts of Asia, how did you look at India, and why was that decision made, and what was the propeller there? Yeah.
So thanks very much for that question, Nidhi, and also thank you to Symbiosis International University for having us here today. So I'm going to answer your question in 2 parts. First and foremost, the various strategic drivers that exist in today's world, I think to a great extent all point in the direction of India. There's a great volatility in many parts of the world, as all of us here are very familiar with already. There are strains in certain relationships between certain countries, whereas India has emerged as not just a very economically and demographically relevant country, but also as one that has, after opening out in 1991, has continued to open out very progressively and very sustainably, I think, in a way that actually invites friends, collaborators, and partners from all over the world. So, frankly, when led by the Indian Prime Minister's vision, when uh, the international branch campuses were welcomed in 2023, uh, it became quite compelling right away, really, for universities such as the one that I represent to consider India very seriously. Uh, we found that there's been a huge amount of support from uh, central government bodies, from the state of Maharashtra. We'll hear from colleagues and friends such as Shri Armstrong and Shri Kostub later today. Uh, and we find that the actual fact is that India already has such a mature higher education system. I mean, Symbiosis itself is a perfect example. But also, if you look at other leading private universities, or you look at uh, some of the very old and established public institutions, uh, personally, my view is from conversations with, let's say, friends at the IITs or at the public institutions, other public institutions, or even institutions like yours. Uh, Institutions here don't really feel as though international branch campuses are coming here to eat their lunch. Uh, I really think that most of them feel that institutions from overseas are coming here, and that enables their collaborators coming closer. And therefore, having been involved very actively with the University of Bristol's partnership since 2018 now, so a number of years, uh, not a single one of our academic collaborators and partners have felt as though this was an unwelcome move in any way. And also, if you just thinking very practically, it's in sync with the government's agenda. It's welcomed by our partners. The demographics all point in the right direction, and also there's this phenomenal opportunity to actually act as a catalyst between academia and industry to the extent possible, particularly in areas of tech, of innovation, of entrepreneurship, which is exactly the kind of courses that we are bringing to India. Because our University of Bristol campus here is called very strategically the Bristol Mumbai Enterprise Campus, which in many ways is a reflection of our Temple Quarter Enterprise Campus in Bristol. And therefore, the courses all reflect that. So, and as the conversation moves on, I'll talk a little more about the kind of partnerships we've established, but I hope that frames the response to some extent.
Yes, thank you so much, Aditya. I move on to you, Ravneet. Now, you were with Deakin, the first international branch campus that was set up in India, and you have recently also had a graduating cohort, so congratulations for that. So I do want to understand that, what made this the right moment and place to enter, and if you look back, what have been some of your most significant on-ground learnings with regards to, say, navigating the complexities, the regulatory systems, student expectations and outcomes, and just, the whole process of program delivery in the Indian context. So how have you seen that journey evolve?
Thank you, Nidhi, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So Deakin University has been in India for 32 years now. We were the world's first university to really set up an office in Delhi. And in 2024, we became the world's first university to set up a campus in Ahmedabad, in Gujarat city. The journey for Deakin has been a very exciting one because I think we've pretty much seen the change and in some form shaped the change of internationalization of higher education in India. When we started with a very basic form of collaboration with Indian institutions. And I guess the intention of Deakin has always been to work in partnership. And we have always focused on in India, with India, for India approach. And we continue to do that given the kind of partnerships that we have and the strategy that we have in place for India. So we started with a very basic rule of partnership, which was about internships, PhDs, joint PhDs, dual PhDs, and so forth, which was the pre-NEP era. And I would say that it was a strong partnership, but it was not a two-way partnership, because we could not have our students come here or students from here go there for credit. That was the problem that we had. When NEP got established, I think it really changed how people thought about partnership in higher education. And that's when real mobility of student and staff started. And that's when Deakin established 4 hubs in India. And Symbiosis is one of our hubs, and we are very proud of that partnership. In fact, Symbiosis partnership with Deakin goes back 15 years, but the hub partnership is post 2020. And in that, we were able to establish dual degrees, where students could do some bit of the program here and some bit of the program in Australia. And we could also have students come here for mobility for credit. And that has really been a very strong strength of Deakin across the education space. We've also been able to do very good stuff around dual degrees and PhD degrees. We have 2 academies with IIT Hyderabad and IIT Madras. And that's also an outcome of NEP in some ways. And then in 2022, my Vice Chancellor, Professor Ian Martin, was here in India, and we met with the Ministry of Finance, and we were encouraged by the Prime Minister's office to think about how we can establish a first campus in India in GIFT City. And GIFT City is an SEZ zone, and we started looking at it, and we thought, why would we not do it? Vis-a-vis, why should we do it? And the answer was very clear. Having been in India for such a long period, understanding what we do in India, and then the opportunity to set up something here, which also brings in the pedagogy as well as brings in some of the stuff that we can do from Australia into India and India into Australia. Because like we say, India is in the DNA of Deakin for so long. So we established this campus, and the 2 years of running the campus has been a very interesting journey. I think it has been a journey that we have all learned so much from, and we continue to learn. And I wouldn't preempt this for people that are coming in with branch campuses, but it is not easy to set up something in another country based on what you have been doing in another country. There are cultural issues. There are issues that you have to deal with in terms of academic aspects, student expectations, student outcomes, and all that takes time. And to set up universities is a long drawn process. We have seen that in India. Let's look at Symbiosis for that matter, right? It has taken Symbiosis how many years to set up to a point where it is. So it is a patient game, and it is not about coming in and taking away students. So I have never ever thought about the fact that you are taking away anybody else's student. It is about bringing in high quality education in a country that desperately needs expansion of education here in India. And again, I say that for us, it is all about how we work in collaboration and in partnership. And GIFT City particularly is a very, very innovative space, because in a radius of 5 kilometers, we've got more than 600 organizations operating. And to me, that is a unique opportunity for universities from India and overseas to think about how we can come together to work through a joint partnership for industry and academia to come together for jobs of the future.
Thanks, Ravneet. That's purely that you've tested the waters before making that big move, and it's interesting to see Deakin's journey span out. And we have an established hub here as well in Symbiosis, so we're very lucky to have those partnerships with Deakin as well. I move on to you, Rajesh. Now, building on these emerging on-ground realities, how does FICCI view this whole system of foreign universities entering through the international branch campuses in India? And what are the implications for the wider Indian higher education system?
Thanks, Nidhi. Great to be here. FICCI, of course, has a very, I would say, robust and a strong practice in higher education for last almost 22 years now. We've been an integral part of most of the significant reforms that government of India has been doing in the space of education. And this last 20 years, has seen a great evolution in terms of how policy and reform is taking place. But the time that we are passing through now, if we were to compare it with the 1991 movement for education, I think it would not be unfair. I mean, yes, it looks like, I mean, we'll have to see how it goes. A lot of transformation, a lot of buzz around various things around education. FICCI has 80 plus sectors. And even within FICCI, it's objectively felt that the 4 trillion to 30 trillion target, of course, there are other sectors that are going to play a big role, but knowledge economy, innovation, research, education, IP, commercialization of research is going to play a predominant role. And therefore, it's so important for FICCI-like organization to not only get into this whole space of reform and policy making, but also take all these stakeholders along and get right insights, because government of the day has become very consultative. It's not that government of yesteryear wasn't consultative, but with the passage of time, there's so much of insights that government agencies now want for policy making, and therefore FICCI-like organization become important, and we feel very enthused to do so. Internationalization of higher education, of course, the TNE landscape, IBC is a big, I would say movement that's happening now, but in 22 we had this dual degree, joint degree, joining regulation also. So maybe if you look at internationalization and TNE overarchingly, we'll also have to be a little mindful of how internationalization, kind of pans out from that lens as well. Let me quickly reflect on the IBC part of it. Of course, there's so much of buzz in India, the growing economy and all of that has really created this ecosystem. But there are 2 or 3 critical areas that we want to kind of reflect around. One, of course, is that as, Ravneet also was mentioning that, it's a patient game, things would evolve, but it's a right move because somewhere down the line, opening up borders and getting, institutions come through to instill healthy competition is a predominant, I would say, approach that government has, because the minister himself was gung-ho about, or has been kind of very categorical about the fact that you want more and more campuses to kind of come in India and create that healthy ecosystem of, collaboration. But one also has to kind of be very careful about the fact that, as Ravneet also was mentioning, that the universities that are coming to India should not just confine itself to the teaching learning space, but research is something that also has to kind of pick up. So from that lens, it's an interesting time, and as FICCI, we have been very clearly looking at it, clearly reflecting on various forums in terms of what is it that we as industry body feels, and all bases the input that we've been getting from members. In fact, one of the critical things that one has to be very clear and categorical about is this. With respect to TNE for IBC campuses, is that the set of institutions that they're targeting would be the ones who otherwise in any case would be going overseas. So the second segment of students, is the one which may not be staying in tier 1 cities, and therefore the outreach program for IBC campuses, is something that's very, very critical. Of course, it's just started, so I'm sure there are a lot of research work and thinking going around that, because the idea is if you want to tap that segment, you also have to be able to communicate yourself well to that segment, which may be residing in tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities, and get the right, I would say, set of people come and join in. Numbers is another important area that one has to be very clear about. I don't know how does that economics work, but going forward, as I said, there are a lot of, it's a journey, and then we'll have to see how kind of, but we have to be a little positive about the fact that this whole system of, foreign university coming through in India and trying to kind of set this whole space up should be seen in a, I would say, very positive way, because, healthy competition is what the ultimate idea should be, yeah?
Good to see some positive sentiments out there with the international branch campuses here, and I'm glad FICCI looks at this as a view of expanding access and opportunity with, of course, informed outreach, especially in the tier 2 and 3 and 4 cities. And you very rightly said that this is indeed like a 1991 moment of opening the doors just we had the economic. I would now like to move on to understanding the forces shaping transnational education, and from your perspective in your context, as to what are the drivers that are leading, push and pull drivers leading into universities moving into the route of transnational education, whether it's through the IBCs or other forms of engagement like dual degrees and other things that we have just discussed. And I would like to start with you, Ravneet, first. And you could also reflect on the rationales for, particularly in your context. So from your extensive experience building onto the Australia-India partnerships, what are the deeper push and pull factors driving Australian universities towards offshore delivery? And is it now a strategic imperative?
So, look, internationalization is a very important part of any international university or organization. Let me take the example of Deakin University here. Internationalization has been a very important part of Deakin's DNA from the beginning. Whether it is internationalization of students coming to study at Deakin, or it is staff at Deakin, or it is curriculum of Deakin, or it is actually now taking all of this and going overseas and looking at setting up branch campuses or partnerships outside of Australia. So, in my mind, it is in education, it is a borderless world, and it needs to have the ability to be able to gain and contribute from different parts of the world. We have students from 49 countries studying at Deakin. And the learnings that the student have through that internationalization is second to none. I know that is going to be hard to replicate in India because it is going to be difficult to do that. But I think that for starters, bringing a pedagogy, bringing the curriculum that is international in nature, that has the accreditations across the world over, is a starting point of internationalization of foreign education into India. I think TNE is a very broad aspect that covers range of things that you can do. Dual degrees are TNE. Articulation pathways can be termed as TNE. License to teach is TNE. Dual PhD degrees is TNE. A full university, overseas university in India is TNE. And I think that this is just the starting point. I think the next 10 years is going to really change and define how universities will bring countries together and how the seamless education between countries, between frameworks, between systems will drive the change. Ultimately, we all need to produce graduates that are ready for jobs of the future, right? And jobs of the future itself is so dynamic and changing that no one university can do that. So it is about coming together. And TNE, in my mind, is about coming together. TNE, in my mind, is about best practices working together. And different models, different forms, different things will work in different countries. And I think that is the uniqueness in my mind about the importance of why TNE is important and how TNE can shape the future.
Thank you, Ravneet. I think you see, and I think in today's world, we see internationalization as an imperative, because, and your long-standing history of already having that relationship has been a driver for you to kind of set up that campus here. And then, and I'm sure it's also looking at other Australian universities that might be exploring that path, looking at how Deakin is doing. I move on to you, Dr. Rajesh. So from an Indian perspective, what are the key drivers that are pushing the country towards transnational education, and how do student aspirations and societal perceptions of international degrees, shape this shift?
So basically, so if you look at the globally mobile student population, India, of course, stands out in few countries and maybe second, in few others. So there's a segment of population that kind of goes and studies in other part of the country. Currently, most of these countries have now become inward-looking with various regulations coming through. So perhaps the fact that since student numbers are taking a hit, so why not go to the destination country. So that's one very critical thing, which is compelling, necessitating, and creating this ecosystem for foreign institutions to look at India as a destination itself. So let's go to the country itself and figure out which way, what way. The fact that fastest growing economy, paying capacity, aspiration, all of that is a objectively felt thing which all of us as stakeholders understand. That is another area. Government, as I said, ministry is so pushy about the fact that we need to have more and more international institutions come to India. Again, another enabling factor. 1.3 million students going overseas versus 45, 50, 60,000 is another matter of concern. So how do we contain a segment of students who could then have an international experience well within India is another important area. Economically, I mean, there's a general sense that there are new economic sectors, the jobs that are going to come through require, let's say, 100 million of workforce by 2030. The conventional Indian universities, I mean, again, another research says that there's a lag time of curriculum update, lag time of 5-7 years. TNE is supposedly understood to be a framework where it's more contemporaneous in terms of the curriculum that's imparted, the industrial link pedagogy and all of that. So that kind of blinks in. So that also in some ways playing out as a factor. As far as student perception is concerned, look, things have dramatically changed. Students have now started seeing world through internet and technology. There's nothing that can create that feeling of awestruck. They get awestruck by anything now. I mean, they're so well informed that they very consciously look at institutions, compare it, and then take a call. And therefore, it's not that they want to go overseas and study. They want to do education, which leads to employability, and their credentials gets globally recognized. So therefore, a segment of student would want to because that works economically also, stay back in India, have this TNE campuses that operate and get that experience, provided with time, if this kind of builds up, which I'm sure it should be because it's just a start. So therefore, from that lens, that segment of students would want to rather, from the economic lens, want to stay back and get themselves enriched and be a part of that TNE campus, the IBC campus that exists in India. So from that lens, students are not averse to not studying in India, but the fact that they want quality education, which supposedly TNE is kind of going to bring about. Society perception is something that is a little tricky. It's a little more complex than that we feel. I mean, there's still a segment of population that still feels that if you want quality, it has to be overseas and all of that. And that's the perception war that TNE has to manage it. That how do you, of course, post-pandemic technology, DPI, and then ranking and all of that has kind of to an extent created a perception where Indian parents have started looking at good quality institutions. But there is another segment that still feels that if it's in India, perhaps it's not of that quality, and if overseas it is. So that is something that one has to see. Of course, it's systemic. It also will evolve with time because the reform and everything that's happening across will help us do that. And when it's perception, it's not about branding, visibility, or marketing. It's about employability and the kind of ultimate I would say work life that they get into is what they determine as one of the factors of success. Industry, again, it's something which is a little dichotomous. I mean, there's a predominant segment of industry feels that TNE students supposedly or perhaps have wider exposure and they're better placed to be working in a multicultural setting, which is true. But there's another segment of industry which again, the credentials and the certification that the student is getting through, they're a little inconsistent in that. In fact, Gift City visit, my Gift City visit did figure that out. I mean, I did figure that out, that there's something which AICTs and others have to, of course, all of them going to get subsumed now. But the regulatory bit is something that has to, of course, come through. I mean, on one hand, government is pushing IBC to come through, but industry perception, there's inconsistency in terms of the certification that they're getting through. And therefore, I'm sure that regulatory coherence and overhaul also will take place as we go forward. So yeah, I mean, this is what, in terms of the enabling factors and how this students and society feels at this whole piece is, this is where we are. Of course, it's going to evolve, but with time, I'm thinking it's going to settle down, provided there's a robust, ecosystem, and on all of us, kind of a little mindful and conscious of the caveats that one has to put across as we go forward. Yeah.
Yeah. Nidhi, I just want to add one point. I think the world is about choices. There will be students who will always want to go overseas and have the full experience of a sort of a dimensional campus, multicultural campus. There will be students who would want to have the experience of an international university in India, and then there will be students who will explore the TNE phase of some bit here and some bit there. So the world is not moving to one is better than the other, and that there are no other choices. And there will be some who would be very happy to study in Indian institutions and look at other opportunities. So I think the world is moving towards bringing in choices to your doorstep. And I think that at the end of it, the return on investment is going to define which choice takes over the other.
Absolutely. I think I think students are in a very interesting time, even though what we are living in a very conflicted world at the moment, but they have a lot of choices to choose from. And we do see from the conversations the links to employability as huge determinants in terms of looking at the drivers of why students would continue to be a part of these kind of programs. But more remains to be seen on how these industry and academia partnerships, particularly with the IBCs, develop as they mature and move to the next phases. And thanks, Rajesh, for talking about the socio-cultural and economic rationales as well of students' choices and societal perceptions and students opting for these programs. Aditya, from a UK perspective, now what structural drivers or say pressures as well are influencing UK universities to look at TNE and whether it is a strategic imperative at the moment?
So that's actually quite a straightforward question from the UK's perspective today, Nidhi. And the reason I say that is, and I'm sure colleagues such as Amrita and others who also represent UK institutions will agree, that there is, so first of all, there's a very natural partnership between the UK and India that goes back many years. Just speaking anecdotally, if one speaks with many people, let's say, that are today in their 60s, 70s, 80s, when the concept of going abroad was mooted in their drawing rooms, it typically meant going to England or going to the UK. So that sort of illustrates they would say, जब विलायत जा रहे हैं, मतलब हम UK जा रहे हैं या England जा रहे हैं. So that's a sort of a cultural link. But coming and speaking more specifically to your question around strategic drivers, the UK government has come out with an international education strategy not long ago. And at the heart of that strategy sits transnational education. Now, I think it's an undisputed fact that the UK has among the best higher education systems in the world, with a strong and proven track record over centuries. Really, this particular policy of the Indian government provides an opportunity for universities like the University of Bristol to bring its expertise to India. That's not to say we want to come and act as colonial outposts, because that's not the approach at all. And if that were the approach that any universities were taking, then I believe that would be completely flawed. And to put it in, let's say, market terminology, I think the Indian consumer, so to speak, is too clever to be taken in by that narrative. So frankly, this is an opportunity for the UK side, as is embedded in the UK's international education strategy, to bring its world-class education to Indian shores. It's also an opportunity for Indian students, as Ravneet said, to have one more option to choose from. Those that want to go abroad and have that multidimensional experience, to borrow her words, will continue to do that. But those that want to remain at home or remain very close to home have that option as well. And they have that option at a more accessible fee, so to speak. And finally, I just want to say that it really does enable universities in India, regulatory bodies in India, university associations in India, to find, as well as in the UK, to find even deeper and closer forms of collaboration to further strengthen this living bridge that already exists. So I think if viewed correctly, if executed correctly, and most importantly, if accepted in the spirit that it has been birthed by students and by parents and by employers, most importantly, this has the power to be truly transformational. And finally, sorry, I'm just going to make one more point. Finally, whether it's Bristol or whether it's other universities that one talks to and sees, everyone seems to be coming in a very sensible and sustainable way, which is bringing in a few programs, bringing in programs uh, that are driven by the needs of employers, and also trying to attract the type of student that will actually gain more from this experience than from alternative experiences. So these are some of the strategic drivers, and at the end of the day, only time will tell how this whole ecosystem flourishes. But what I can say so far is it's all looking very positive and very upbeat.
Okay, thanks, Aditya. It's interesting to know that the universities are quite in alignment in the UK context with the international education strategy that was rolled out, and that's one of the prime drivers, besides other aspects that universities are grappling it and moving in a very positive sentiment when looking at India and the Indian market and looking at special or niche programs that could cater to a limited audience, a limited number of students for now, but more remains to be seen in terms of widening the access and whether more opportunities can be created for them. Dr. Varghese, I more want to you. So how would you theoretically interpret these drivers, whether they're political, geopolitical, social, economic, educational, within the shift from internationalization of higher education to transnational education? And are there any existing frameworks that adequately, capture these emerging realities?
No, as it was, thank you. As it was mentioned by all, one thing is that we have moved towards market-friendly reforms. So now the question is, there are two questions that may be driving us forward. Whether these institutions can be people-friendly. When I say people-friendly, I'm not talking in terms of any other issues other than in terms of prices and profits. Yes, market can understand only two things, prices and profits. How do we make institutions which are relying on the very foundation is on profits, prices and profits can become people friendly. So the questions of affordability, I will not put in the same way in which we put up affordability for the public institutions. So for example, if you look back, how the capitation fee colleges started in India, and some of them, many of them are getting closed down, especially in Andhra Pradesh and in Tamil Nadu. What we find is that initially there was an enthusiasm and people were ready to pay for it because it was seen as an investment. Because if you invest, you get a degree and you can sell this in the market and your earnings will be much higher. I think that will be one of the variations or factor which will be highly influencing subsistence or sustenance of in the international branch campuses in India. So for example, what is the competition that is taking place now? The competition in the next 5 years or 10 years will be between the public institutions which are elite in India to the private institutions which are elite in India and the branch campuses. Branch campuses are not going to be in competition with 90% of the higher education enrollment or institutions which are enrolling 90% of the students. It is this 10%. So it is a competition among the elites that will be taking place. And who will win in this competition will depend upon the margin, if I can use a term, the rate of returns, expected rate of returns. When I go for a public institution like IIT, etc., its prestige will remain. And many of these institutions will not be in competition with that because entry to this institution is highly restricted and highly selective. And the graduates will be getting employment from these institutions at any cost. So there is no problem. But the elite private institutions and elite and the TNE, there will be a competition. If I pay 10 lakhs rupees, this figure has no connection with the reality. If I spend 10 lakh rupees, if I can get a degree from an elite private institution, which I don't want to name, And if I can spend 15 lakhs and get a degree from one of the IBC campuses or TNC, I'll make a calculation whether I should go for invest 10 lakhs or whether I should invest 15 lakhs. My decision to invest 15 lakhs will depend upon what will be the expected returns I get over and above if I get a degree from an elite private institution or a public institution. So the nature of competition in higher education is changing. And I feel that what drives these institutions is elitism, not massification. What drives these institutions is the courses that they offer, which are market-friendly courses, which fetch them employment. Why I went back to the issue of capitation fee colleges. Why did the capitation fee colleges are getting closed down in Tamil Nadu? Or which has less than 50% enrollment in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana? Because the employment prospects have declined. This was not the case in the 1990s or 2000, in the first decade of this century. So this will depend upon the employability prospects of the graduates and the capacity of the households to invest. Not only the capacity, but also the willingness. This willingness will come from these factors that I explained. The capacity will remain certainly without much difficulty, but where should I invest will be decided on the basis of these factors, and that will influence the sustenance, the continuity of the institutions. Let us be also clear about one thing, that some of the TNC campuses, not in India, we are just starting, we are in a romantic stage of TNC. We have not reached the reality of TNC. But some of the countries which face the reality of TNC, many campuses are closed down. So that's also a reality. And in some of the institutions, you find that even in Dubai, you find that there is a decline in enrollment in some of the campuses.
Yeah.
But this is not happening with other campuses. So that is what I want to add to the debate.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you that I think at the end of it, it is about, like I said, return on investment, and it is about a choice. But what is going to be really important for higher education, full stop, and it doesn't matter where and what from, is going to be how we are going to create graduates that are going to actually get jobs. And that is the difficult part today, because if you talk to industry, and Rajesh, correct me if I'm wrong, most of the people in the industry are also saying that because the attributes are changing so fast, it's very hard also for industry to figure out what they want in the jobs. So we've got to be, institutions will have to be agile, they'll have to be very connected real time with industry, and they will have to focus on skills and knowledge together and not just degrees. I think that is going to be really important.
So if I can add, thank you very much for that addition. If I can add one sentence, today in India, we have an Indian price and Indian salary. How the game will change? We have an international price and Indian salary, people are not ready to accept. So if you are paying an international price, we expect that an international salary. So therefore, it is not only the labor market in India, but also the acceptance of these graduates in the global labor market will decide. That means an international price and international salary. So the competition is between, if I can articulate it differently, the competition is between Indian price and Indian profit versus international price and international profit, or earnings, not profit, earnings.
If I can just
sure.
come in with one quick point, Nidhi, which is fully agree with what's been said. We've talked a lot about employability, which of course is crucial. I also just want to say another aspect, which is in the same genre or bucket as employability, is job creation. So blooding and encouraging entrepreneurship, which of course is something that is very much ingrained in the Indian DNA already. Right from our kirana stores to unicorns and now what are known as sunicorns. So speaking for the university that I'm representing, which is why we strategically called our setup the Mumbai Enterprise Campus, because it really is focused on, yes, employability, but also on encouraging graduates to become job creators themselves, bring their entrepreneurial ideas to fruition with the support of the university ecosystem.
Thank you.
Yeah, Nidhi. Yeah, so very quickly, in fact, yeah. So, so the aggression is something that, we as Vicky feel is something that needs to watch out for. The pace at which the numbers of IBCs kind of is happening in India, because as I said earlier also, and to the point that Dr. Verghese made, that 10 lakh versus 15 lakhs, today's kids and today's students are so smart that they would maybe not even think of going for that IBC and go for a good quality high-end private universities, forget about IITs. If that, ROI, ROI could entail multiple things, employability, entrepreneurship, and they're smart enough to understand multiple other elements which if the IBC is able to cater, and therefore a lot of spade work, hard work, research that is required of maybe Deacon with 30 plus years experience may have an edge there, but the ones who are getting into have to work out. You talked about those numbers where it took a hit. Yes, so India would be no different, So therefore it's very, very critical for IBCs to consciously, and I don't know, I mean, it could always have in a phased manner because as I said, the social sector, in general, education in particular requires some time, So I think the approach of all the stakeholders, should be realistic enough to understand that and keep that factor in when we are looking at this whole piece of IBC setting up and being set up in India and TNE, as a whole. To the point which, skill sets point, I'll just quickly kind of highlight on that. So Planning Commission, of course, erstwhile Planning Commission used to do this monthly thought leader program, and this is Japanese scholar who had come, and she had studied the higher education system of 100 countries in the world then, this 2012, 13, and, and she had said that all the 100 countries that she's looked at had a similar kind of pattern when it came down to higher education and employability and all of that, that if GER is around 15%, degrees would fetch you jobs. And India then was around, about 23, 24%, sorry, 13, 14%, I'm just on the verge of crossing 15. And the moment you cross 15%, massification of degrees starts taking place. I mean, that's a number that she worked out basis 100 countries, higher education system study. And therefore, employers of the day then start looking at competences, skill sets, and all of that. So whether it's IBC, whether it's India, whether it's whatever, the university has to ensure that they're able to cater to the needs of, the 21st century education. And then, it becomes a choice of, or destination for study, something that one has to be very clear about. So competences, skill sets, and yes, industry would interface. They will not even look at key. And there are many such students who have their postgraduates and from foreign universities, either they have not made it or have been very ordinarily placed. Ordinarily in the sense that very modestly placed, because it's a competency and and the delivery that you do, which employers now have started looking at every interface that we do with the candidate. So from that lens, candidates also have understood that. So universities, institutions have to be very, very mindful of that, whether it's IBC or whether it's an institution. And therefore, that's a healthy competition that I was talking about, and it's good. It's very interesting to be in that space and as we go forward. Yeah.
Thanks. And I think we had a very interesting debate here in terms of different perspectives, moving from elitism associated with the IBCs to questions around massification and affordability and access to higher education, particularly in a very strong demographics that we find ourselves in today, and the questions about employability and preparing programs and graduates with those for employment opportunities versus having the return on investment match the outcomes, and then bringing in the entrepreneurship element. So we'll have to see how the space evolves, but it's interesting to look at that the IBCs are looking at not just employability but also developing entrepreneurship skills and creating jobs for the future. I would like to open the floor to questions, and I would request if you could raise your hands, and we probably have time for 2 questions. So if you could introduce yourself and very briefly and ask the question and indicate the panelists. Yeah.
Hello. Hi, this is Dr. Ravik Sagar from Nikmar University. I have one question for Dr. Verghese and maybe Dr. Rajesh. Since the topic is basically that we are into transition of transnational education. So while we could do multiple things to enable this, my question is from a priority point of view, which objective seems to be most important for India as a country? And in your opinion, top 3 objectives we must pursue to get to that direction? Because transition is always a very delicate phase to go through. Would like to hear your input, sir.
Yeah, you said what are the three top priorities that?
Yeah. So as I said, in a transition phase. Sir, my question is, as we are, the topic is, our conversation is that we are in a transition in transnational
That's right.
education. My question is, while there are multiple objectives that we can pursue at the same time in this transition phase, where India as a country, our priority should lie, because doing so many things at the same time perhaps may not yield the results what we are looking for. And I'm looking for some expert guidance and inputs on this line. So this question goes to you as well as Dr. Verghese. Thank you.
Yeah, so if I were to rephrase this, I mean something like, so top three priorities which a TNE should, it's the country should look at from TNE lens, of course. See, so research is one big area that all of us are talking about. So, and that's something that I wanted to kind of highlight in my remarks also, that somewhere down the line, the campuses that are setting up, of course, they'll start with teaching, learning, as a core, objective. But research is one thing which institutions should now start looking at. The global universities setting up their campuses in India, because I don't know about Anusandhan National Research Foundation. I'll really have to get into the nitty-gritty of it, but I very clearly remember that the NEP document did talk about the fact that there could be research funding even for a foreign entity if it is in the interest of India and if it has efficacy, national efficacy. So that's the level of, I would say, thought process that now exists in the policy ecosystem. So therefore, Indian partner and the foreign partner should certainly look at getting into research and not wait for anything. I mean, there could be certain area of, and given this geopolitical and all of those issues that's happening, and there's so many global issues that we all kind of grapple with, and what better than university system getting into it. So therefore, one area that one could right away start with. I mean, there's nothing like a patient capital or a patient that you have to display for this. You can start looking at one or two areas where universities should start collaborating on that. The second, of course, is the dual degree, joint degree. See, it's been 3-4 years now since this has been as a regulation, but unfortunately, and I had to kind of reflect on this, because see, end of the day, government can give overarching regulation, but it's between universities that they set across table and figure out and iron out the differences. There have been success stories in, of course, joint degree is a little stickier, but in dual degree, there have been, success stories within institutions, and therefore universities should also consciously look at foreign partners to get into their space, because ultimately TNE has to be sharing of best practices and success stories, and that is something which regulation will not do. Regulation is already in place. In fact, DAAD had kind of German universities and Indian universities, they had created a task force, and they had looked at the nomenclatures of all degrees and everything that is done in India and in Germany, and figured out something, because all these efforts would lead to ironing out those differences and really getting institutions worked out. So dual degree, joint degree, twining, of course, has been there in existence for some time now, is another low-hanging piece that one should prioritize it. I mean, two specific things that I sincerely feel that one should, of course, student mobility, faculty research, all that in any case has been happening, that only will accelerate with time. But two specific points I feel that should happen as a priority and should happen right away.
Thank you. My take on this issue is that briefly 3 issues. One is research, second is access to quality higher education, and third one is the skill formation. Now, when we talk about research, research has become a casualty in India in the context of massive expansion that is taking place. And if you see that the master's degrees program accounts only for 11% of enrollment, and doctoral degree programs account only for 0.45% of the total enrollment. So there is a big problem. And if you look at the research universities which are actively engaged in research and publications, it is not more than 150 universities out of 1,400 institutions. So research is, in a sense, in a very, very difficult situation. So therefore, that is to be revived. But I don't think that TNE is a solution to revive research, at least in the short run, because their focus is more in terms of curriculum transactions and education transactions rather than generating knowledge or knowledge creation. And I think this trend will continue for some more time till they are stabilized and sustainable effort, then they will turn their attention to knowledge generation. So now it is mostly knowledge transaction. The second, access to quality education. Certainly the TNEs will be a very good example for quality education, higher education. But the only thing is that whether this will have an impact on the overall quality improvement of higher education, I don't think so, because it becomes less than, even TNE enrollment, etc., will not account for a major share. It will be less than 1% of the total gross enrollment ratios that we are talking about. Therefore, I don't think that it will have make an impact, but certainly a limited number of households who can afford to send their children to these schools, these institutions will get quality education. So, in other words, indirectly, what we are saying is that quality is guaranteed in the TNE branch campuses, etc. That is something very important. The third issue is skill formation. I think there is something that we have to see, that when I go for these higher education conferences, etc., I take a position that we cannot put a corporate orientation and perspective and skill formation over emphasis on higher education. I'm not saying that skill formation is not important, but what is important is that, what do we mean by skill? Do you need a trained person from a university or a trainable person? That's a question. Universities are not the best mechanisms to produce trained persons. The trained person should be on the job, that should be left to the employer. But universities should produce trainable person so that the training cost of the employers itself is reduced. So the question is between trained versus trainability. So when you talk about skill, it is very important introducing the students in the universities to different forms and varieties of skills, and it's a different layers of skill formation. But the skill formation in the form of a training is not the responsibility, is not the job of universities. Universities should not be criticized for not producing job-specific skills, but they should be criticized severely if the academic depth is reduced, if knowledge is diluted in terms of when it is transacted in terms of the rich content that is available, But today the biggest problem is that I am also a professor. So teachers, we do not have teachers to guide enough students. And the UGC says that if you have more than 8 students, don't take students. In some of the universities like Jawaharlal Nehru University, I think Saumin is here, he will support. I'll stop. That there are no recruitment for research students because there are no teachers to supervise, And when you have a large number of teaching positions lying vacant in the universities and colleges in India, we cannot talk about this priority is really getting implemented. So this is a desire. This is an aspiration rather than what is realized by the public policies.
Thank you. In the interest of time, we'll just now move on to the last segment, and that's about a utopic situation. We have had divergent views of focusing on employability versus not overemphasizing on employability, but on the skills formation and competence development, which is a very important point you raised. Now, I just, in less than a minute, I would request the panelists to kind of look at a more utopic situation. Looking at, say, 2035, a decade from now, what would be the most ideal TNE corporation that you would like to establish with India, and how does that reflect and enhance probably India's position, global positioning, and moving towards a Viksit Bharat, global hub vision by 2047? So less than a minute for each panelist. So we start with you, Aditya.
So look, Nidhi, I'm too practical to sort of play with utopia. But since you've asked, I'll just say that in an ideal world, in 9 or 10 years from now, I'd say we have, a free mobility of students from India to the outside and from the outside to India. I would like to see more international students coming to India, coming to Indian universities, as well as coming to the international branch campuses that hopefully will have crossed 100 by the time we come to 2035, all flourishing in great harmony with one another. I'd also like to see some, really stronger industry academia collaborations, uh, where you have more professors of practice coming and teaching at universities. You have more internship opportunities. Uh, so again, I'll stop here. I'll hand over perhaps to my more imaginative co-panelists.
Thank you. I will say that in the long run, the TNC should not be evaluated on the basis of what is happening in TNE or what is happening to the students who are coming to TNE. It should be evaluated on the basis of its impact on internationalization of higher education in India. Why I am making this point is that TNE may have a limited impact of 1% of the enrollment or 2% of the enrollment, including those students who are going abroad. It will not exceed 3% of the total higher education enrollment in India in the NCB future, at least for the next 25 years. So therefore, what if TNEs are existing in India, what is their contribution, effect in terms of internationalizing Indian higher education, not internationalizing their campuses? That is already internationalized. So that will be the basis on which I will try to make an assessment of the role, responsibilities, and its contribution of TNC from the long-term point, not talking about the short-term, long-term point of view.
Yeah. Two-way mobility, bilateral, seamless mobility between India and the partner countries is something that, we would want to look at. And if we be a little realistic, of course, 1.3 million is quite a number. So the number certainly will be high, given the fact that we have a demographic dividend. So we should not match up to it. But this number should certainly be sizable. But more than the number being sizable, full-blown undergrad master's program from sizable number of countries. Now, that is where I want to reflect. 9-10 years, let's be realistic. So Southern Hemisphere, students from Southern Hemisphere, if they come and look at India as a destination, then why should I go there? I'll go to India and study. 9-10 years is a decent time to start with. 17, some 20-25 countries from the regional geography. Of course, we should aspire to also attract students from Western world. But if we're able to really do it, who come with a full-blown program, serious candidates, not looking for free scholarships, but wanting to come and pursue in India and really get that, would be a great, I would say, ecosystem that we'll be able to build in, from now. And of course, it should not be skewed in terms of universities having international partners. So islands of excellence as symbiosis, there are quite a few who've managed to, but let's say a threshold number of, 100, 150 universities in India managing a sizable number of students from a sizable country is something that we want to look at. Co-creation of curriculum, it's really a two-way kind of a thing, and not really have just India looked at India as a marketplace or just kind of attract and students. So that's something which 9-10 years time is a decent time, but it'll be a huge success, because in any case we're conventionally known to be a talent hub. So I'm sure, and from there on we build it up by 2047 and really become a global destination from them. Yeah.
I think for me, similar points about a borderless sort of a marrying of frameworks of different countries, so that their movement between degrees and movement for students from one part of the world to the other part of the world is easier. Also attracting more students to experience India. I think we have not really utilized the benefit of the Indian system of education, which is also deep-rooted. I think the blend of internationalization of foreign universities in India and Indian universities with foreign universities, to me, I think that is going to be the changing part of higher education in India. I think also innovative models that actually allow movement, not just about work rights or not just about being in one country or the other, but producing global citizens that actually take care of the future needs of the world. I think research that makes a difference and that helps resolve world issues, and for people to come together to really think about what actually matters and how we can use the collective expertise to come out with outcomes that the world today hear, whether it is India, Australia, UK, or anywhere else in the world. So really coming together of experts, students, and expert minds to look at real solutions, in my mind, would be really good to see over the next couple of years.
Thanks, Ravni. That's beautifully put. I think the narratives around equitable partnerships and experiencing India in a more wider sense of not just looking at only a specific countries, but being open to the world, deep-rooted in knowledge and systems that's underexplored at the moment, but probably is the way forward. We see maybe in a decade from now, things might emerge in the situation. So thank you so much, all the panelists. We are a little ahead of the time, but it's great to kind of reflect more on the conceptual realities, the underpinnings in terms of the evolution of internationalization of higher education and the rise of transnational education, and then looking at different rationales driven by marketization of higher education versus massification, the association of elitism versus affordability and access, and the current tensions that we explored in the aggressive rise of IBCs in India versus the impact on quality. So we deliberated all in the panel. Thank you all the panelists, and thanks to all dignitaries and delegates joining for the session today. The speakers will be available afterwards to if you have any further questions. Apologies, we could only take one question from the audience, but thank you so much for that. Over to the MC. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this very, very important conversation. I think critical theorists over and over and over again talk about how thickly networked knowledge is with power. But it's also those same critical theorists, right, who tell us that creativity and imagination are crucial nodes of agency in that network. And I think your conversation has enabled us to see TNE as located at that crucial intersection. So thank you very much. May I please invite Dr. Rajni Gupte, former Vice Chancellor of Symbiosis International University, to please come up on stage to felicitate the panelists. May I request all the panelists to come a little forward so we can take a group picture, please. Thank you very much once again for your engagement with IHE 2026. Thank you.